Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, retains 11.5% monetary policy rate despite recession. Federal government disburses 10 billion naira MSMEs fund. Coast clear for Okonjo-Iweala as South Korea withdraws candidate for World Trade Organization boss. And on our discussion segment, conversation on the outcome of CBN Monetary Policy Committee's meeting will be brought to the fore. The program is Business Express and it is reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Leah Katun Babatunde. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed says government is committed to fostering partnership with the private sector for resilience as the Nigerian Economic Summit ends. She restates that the borrowing level of Nigeria is not on the high side and building infrastructure remains key to achieving the developmental goals of the nation.
It's either we borrow these loans and do them now and improve the business environment so that businesses can invest here and grow and pay taxes, or we sit back and say until we're able to afford to, then we will do it.
So we're in the right direction and we've got the right person where we think we want her to be, but we all need to give her support. There's a lot to be done. We're coming from a minus position, honestly.
Also speaking at a roundtable discussion at the just concluded Economic Summit, the Minister of Finance gave an indication of reopening Nigerian borders, which were closed since August last year. Zainab Ahmed said a committee set up by President Muhammadu Buhari had done an assessment of the gains of the closure and had recommended to the President to reopen the borders. In view of the recommendation, she was optimistic that the President would act soon. Stakeholders in the Nigerian transportation sector have identified a efficient transportation system as a key element that would guarantee the competitiveness of the Nigerian private sector, especially for trade in goods in the African Continental Free Trade Area market. This was the central discussion at the ongoing workshop on Nigeria, the transportation hub for Africa, as part of the AFCFTA Nigeria Strategy Workshop Series 2, held virtually earlier this week by the National Action Committee on the AFCFTA. The workshop, which ends today, Wednesday, had speakers x-raying the potential in the agri sector, attracting international businesses. Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Mariam Katagum, observed that Nigeria must maximize the opportunities in the AFCFTA market for economic growth and job creation. And for the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Serika, beyond preparations for the start of trade under AFCFTA in January 2021, Nigeria is investing massively in the aviation sector in order to increase connectivity, facilitate trade and establish Nigeria as the aviation hub on the continent. He added that the target is to raise aviation sector's contribution to GDP to 5% by the year 2023. On the federal government's efforts at improving road infrastructure, the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, said roads connecting Nigeria to the rest of the continent are currently being worked on as Nigeria seeks to increase her interconnectivity across Africa. And Secretary, National Action Committee on AFCFTA, Francis Anatogu, said Nigeria has an urgent need to diversify the economy as her dependence on oil export is responsible for the current state of things, adding that the AFCFTA is an opportunity to achieve the quest for the economic diversification. Now, more than 10 out of the 75 billion naira survival fund has so far been disbursed to beneficiaries across the country, with plans to reopen the fund's registration portal to allow states to meet their targets. The federal government Survival Fund Steering Committee, led by the Minister of State Industry, Trade and Investment, Mariam Katagum, disclosed this in Abuja during a media parley.
However, due to the inability of some states to meet their targets, the portal is likely to be reopened to accommodate some specific states. For the artisans, we have reached our percentages of getting the 45%. And I think in some states, the female artisans slightly outnumbered the male artisans.
Now, the third quarter meeting, the last meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria's Monetary Policy Committee for the year ended yesterday with a call for targeted investment by the fiscal authorities to critical infrastructure and improve the ease of doing business across the country.
Available data and forecasts for key macroeconomic variables also suggest optimism in output growth during the fourth quarter of 2020 due to the positive outlook for most economic activities. Accordingly, the economy is expected to recover from the recession by the end of 2020, while the inflation is projected to moderate by the first quarter of 2021.
Now, just when Nigeria recorded consecutive negative growth, the Central Bank of Nigeria's highest policy-making committee, the Monetary Policy, of course, met to review economic and financial conditions in the economy. To discuss the outcome of this meeting and the possible impact on the Nigerian economy, I have with me Simon Samson Galadima. He is an economist, and I'll also welcome you to the program.
Thank you, madam.
Okay, great. So let me just start with, did you envisage that the MPC would sustain the rates?
Well, most people expected cut in the rates. They were expecting cuts because the economy is officially in recession. So normally when an economy is contracting, we embark on expansionary policies. So one of the ways of embarking on this expansionary policy is by cutting rates. So most people were expecting the central bank to cut rates, but they have good reasons for not cutting rates. You know, the primary responsibility of the central bank is price stability, and inflation is also going through the roof. So it's a difficult balancing act. You want to spur growth, you want to increase output, but at the same time you want to tame prices, the rise in inflation. So that was why they opted for this, I believe. Keeping everything, holding everything the way it is.
Okay. Of course, there's the thinking of bigger spending plan, but at the same time, some schools of thought will say that Nigeria simply defies basic principle of economics when you say we need to spend, but then we have rising inflation and we have a shrinking GDP. How do you explain that?
Is actually, there's a term for it, they call it stagflation in economics.
Exactly.
So when you have contraction and you have inflation, normally they don't occur at the same time. If you want increase in output, you can give room for additional inflation and output will go up, then and the other way around. Unfortunately, we have the two evils of inflation and unemployment or contraction in the economy. So it's normally very difficult to handle. And for the Monetary Authority, I think they have done what they feel is the most important thing, because they feel inflation is not caused by monetary factors. So by cutting rates, you are not actually going to help with the inflation. They feel the inflation is caused by structural rigidities. This border closure is one of the factors. COVID is there, insecurity, these are some of the factors. And that is not within the purview of the central bank. So what they can do is to leave the rates the way they are. Then for output, if they want to spur growth, they can increase lending to the real sector, like what they are doing with the unorthodox policy of loan to deposit ratio. They have increased it. They are compelling deposit money banks to lend to the real sector, to lend to the productive sectors of the economy, so that at least the growth will be spurred and we will not be long in this recessionary state.
So in all of all these now, what will be your take on price stability?
Well, price stability seems to have eluded us in this country. The objective of any monetary authority the world over is to have single-digit inflation rates. For Nigeria, it's 6 to 9%. And it has been a while since when we had single-digit inflationary rate. So I think the central bank is on the right path if they continue with what they're doing. Like the last time in September or so, when they realized that there was some monetary induced inflation, they decided to increase the CRR, the cash reserve ratio. But at the moment, they don't see any inflationary factor. So that's not within their own control. So structural rigidities have to be eliminated. Some of the deficiencies in infrastructure and the increase in pump price of fuel is also a factor. The hike in electricity tariff, these are some of the things. So all these things will take a while to work off before we see the impact on inflationary pressure be reduced.
Okay, I was also meaning to ask you, we've also witnessed in recent time the exchange rate instability.
Well, our exchange rate is artificially maintained. We are an import-dependent economy, and we have, you can as well say, we have sole source, just one source of foreign exchange earning, which is oil. So we hardly export to earn foreign exchange. So when the prices of oil on the international market are high, we have sufficient money in our reserves to defend the naira. But when they are down, we can hardly defend the naira. So this pressure will always be there. And no matter what the government does, whether the monetary authorities or the fiscal authorities, there is nothing much they can do to maintain the value of the naira.
Okay,
unless if we start exporting and we become an export-oriented.
Okay, I want to actually just take a step towards the exports now. We've also seen these policies all over the place to ensure that other sectors are active. For instance, with the MSMEs fund to retain jobs and spur production. The CBN is doing that alongside the federal government across sectors. They're also putting some money into health funding. In the long run, if it works out well, how will that help our drive to export not only oil?
Well, it's a long-term thing. It's not something that you do overnight. So if the government is serious, it can only encourage, it has to be private sector driven. Government can only go as far. So they have to boost the ease of doing business. I think they have been trying, but it has been basically superficial, if you ask me. They need to entrench reforms that will actually spur growth, that will stimulate growth from all sectors of the economy. When there is growth and you have maybe import substitution, we consume what we produce, then eventually we can start exporting. I think that will help in making the naira the strong currency that we want it to be.
Okay, just yesterday, the central bank governor also announced they'll be doubling the targeted facility from 150 billion to 300 billion. The injection of this fund, the credit expansion, what is the import of that?
Well, you know, COVID has actually impacted the economy seriously. So the economy is on its knees at the moment. It needs some support. So they are trying to stimulate growth. They want to stimulate output. They want to see if unemployment can be reduced, and subsequently people can be employed and they can help contribute to the economy. So these are some of the things they can do. They have to support the most vulnerable in the society, or else things will likely get worse, not only for those people affected, but for the entire economy.
It will seem, as some people would say, that the monetary policies, the policymakers there are doing just so much more than expected. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the central bank has embarked on what they call unorthodox or heterodox monetary policy, things that are outside the conventional tools such as the MPR, the CRR, the LR. They are going beyond that. They are going into development financing. They are doing a lot of social responsibility. It's because in a developing economy like ours, they have to go out of their way to do things. If they don't, then they can as well forget about the existence of the monetary authority. It may be an exaggeration, but they are highly incapacitated if they don't go out of their way to do these other things that they're doing.
Okay, so how would you marry the relationship now between the monetary policies and on the fiscal side on spurring the economy back to the path of growth?
For any economy, there are basically two policies. There are other policies, but the two most important policies are monetary policies and fiscal policies. And the two of them need to reinforce each other for the targets to be achieved. Maybe you need stable prices, you need low unemployment rates, you need to export so that you have equilibrium, balance of payment, and so on, equitable distribution of income. You need to work together. If you work together, the synergy will help to fix whatever problem you want to tackle. But if you are working at cross purposes, then it's likely going to come to futility.
Okay, now this marriage now is convenient to the fact that they want to see Nigeria get out of this recession by the first quarter of next year.
Well, considering what has happened, I think the second quarter, the economy contracted by more than 6%. And in the third quarter, in Q3, it was 3 years. So if you project that, if you considering the trend, we are likely going to be out of recession by first quarter of next year, but it's not set in stone. The possibility is there. We just hope that we don't have a second wave of COVID-19, and maybe the price of oil maintains an upward trend. These are some of the things that can help. But perchance these things do not happen, and God forbid the opposite happens, then we are not likely going to be out of recession by the first quarter of next year. Okay.
So if you're going to help us look at the scenario before us as a country now, before Nigeria, how do you think we can achieve growth of our economy at the speed which our population is growing? Because that seems to be a major issue in addressing most of these problems we're having right now.
Yes, the rate at which we are growing is actually too fast for the economy, and that's why things are getting worse. Our misery is increasing. We have become the poverty capital of the world. All the negative indices, we are taking over India. We are overtaking India, and we are becoming the leaders in those negative rankings. It's because of our population, and there's no commensurate increase in GDP. And even when the GDP increases, it's not really equitable, it's not really sustainable. So for us to be out of the woods, we need to work on our population, not necessarily birth control. We have to make sure that people are educated, people have things to do. We need to make each member of society productive, not just a consuming member of society, but everybody should be producing. And it's not just about going to school to acquire a degree, it's about being productive, doing something to help spur growth within the economy.
Okay, I must thank you very, very sincerely, Simon Samson Galadima, for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now let's move on. South Korea has decided to withdraw its candidate from the World Trade Organization WTO Director General race, according to Washington Trade Daily. Yo Min-hee is South Korea's trade minister and its candidate for the top job at the WTO following the resignation of Roberto Azevedo. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Nigeria's candidate in the WTO race, had secured the popular vote by a wide margin on October 28, but was not named DG because the U.S. opposed her candidacy. The two women are the last candidates standing, and the eventual winner will set a record as being the first female WTO DG. However, there are speculations that the U.S. might change its stance following Donald Trump's failure to get re-elected as president. After the October 28 meeting, WTO also said Okonjo-Iweala had the best chance of getting a consensus. Washington Trade Daily quotes sources as saying South Korea has notified the U.S. of its decision and is expected to make it public in the coming days. The November 8 General Council meeting scheduled to consider the appointment of the new DG was postponed. Another General Council meeting has been scheduled for December 17. Now, as part of its infrastructure master plan, the federal government is planning to use the over 10 trillion naira pensions fund to fix the infrastructure deficit. Speaking during the 26th Nigeria Economic Summit in Abuja, Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Shamshuna Ahmed said the Nigerian infrastructure master plan has been costed, adding that it would require up to $10 billion to bridge the infrastructure deficit. She said government is currently in the process of imputing the infrastructure plan into the Nigeria Agenda 2050 and the Nigerian Development Plan being worked on, adding that the government has just taken a decision to set up an infrastructure company, Infraco, that will be driven by the private sector. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says government wants to see much greater commitment and a plan that is as aggressive as the country's aspirations from the private sector. The Vice President, during a webinar with some French business leaders under the auspices of the Franco-Nigeria Chamber of Commerce and Industry, notes that the private sector committed needs to align to the federal government's backward integration policy, noting that over the years, many companies have committed to backward integration, but have simply not been as diligent and faithful with those promises.
Do this without collaboration, and meaningful collaboration is really quite critical here. Collaboration between countries and between sectors has become more important than ever. You know, for us, a key priority remains the provision of jobs for the large number of very young people. You know, 70% of Nigeria's population. In effect, you know, providing jobs for the Nigerian population. And we have been determined to, you know, work on ways to continue to create real opportunities for young Nigerians, bridging existing skill gaps, equipping them with resources that they need to contribute positively to our national development. So we're really eager to work with, you know, member organizations of this Chamber of Commerce, you know, as we implement future programs, future job programs, future economic programs.
The Ministry of Petroleum Resources, DPR, and the NNPC have been directed to give the necessary support to Walter Smith Refining and Petrochemical Company, including access to crude oil and condensate feedstock, towards expanding the capacity of its modular refinery to 50,000 barrels per day. President Muhammadu Buhari gave the directive at a virtual inauguration of the company's 5,000 barrels per day modular refinery in Imo State. The Walter Smith Modular Refinery has a capacity of over 271 million liters of refined petroleum products per annum, including kerosene, diesel, and heavy oils to the domestic market, presently refining 5,000 barrels per day. The company is looking at 50,000 barrels per day with a capacity that will come with a planned additional 2 models, which will add PMS, aviation fuel, and LPG to the product slate.
The people of Imo State for hosting this refinery, which I trust will bring prosperity and economic development.
For the second day in a row, the Nigerian stock market ended Wednesday trading session on a positive territory. The oil share index appreciated by 1.25% to close at 34,769 basis points. Market capitalization rose to 18.1 trillion naira. 434.9 million units of shares valued at 6.9 billion naira exchanged hands in 7,029 deals. Gold languished near a 4-month low on Wednesday as appetite for risky assets remained buoyed by the former start of the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's transition to the White House and hopes a COVID-19 vaccine will be ready soon. And stocks in Asia Pacific were mixed this Wednesday. Let's join Bossade Abel for Global Market Outlook.
Positive coronavirus vaccine news and emerging political certainty in the U.S. have prompted global stock markets to rally, but the momentum petered out in the early hours of the European trading session. European stocks were mostly lower in early Wednesday trade, pausing for breath after rallying on growing political certainty in the U.S. and positive coronavirus vaccine news. Africa stocks were mixed, with Tunisia's Tunidex and Ghana's GSE Composite posting gains. Stocks in Asia Pacific were mixed on Wednesday as a recent rally bolstered by coronavirus vaccine hopes and reduced uncertainty in the U.S. politics paused. Shanghai Composite dropped 1.19% to close at approximately 3,362.33, while Nikkei rose 0.5% to close at 26,296.86. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong also advanced 0.31% to close at 26,669.75. U.S. stock futures were little change early Wednesday following a banner day for 3 of the 4 major markets benchmarks. Dow Jones Industrial Average futures pointed to an opening loss of less than 50 points. S&P 500 futures were little changed and Nasdaq 100 futures traded marginally higher. The Dow broke above 30,000 for the first time on Tuesday, rallying more than 400 points. Tuesday's rallying put the Dow on pace for its biggest monthly gain since 1987, up more than 13%. Bossade Abel, Business Express.
Now this brings us to the end of this edition of Business Express. Remember to reach us with your feedbacks, comments and observations, and also be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube, and you can also communicate with us on Twitter. Business Express returns tomorrow. My name is Leah Katun. Baba Tunde.